January 21, 1924. This day went down in history as the death of the head of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, the leader and father of the proletariat, Vladimir Lenin. The Union was faced with the choice of a new head. At that time, no one imagined a dictator would rise to power, oust main party figures, and have blood on his hands from tens of millions of people. His fully controlled secret units would keep nearly every Soviet citizen in fear.
He needed to prove to them that they were doing wrong. He drove them out. In different ways. First, after the accusation, of course, removal from party office. Then, removal from the Soviet post. Then expulsion, as it was with Trotsky, as it was with Bukharin, Rykov. And then murder.
In 1934, the USSR established a new body, gradually crushing all spheres of power and influence. People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, NKVD. The former State Political Directorate also became part of the newly formed agency. In fact, the NKVD has become an instrument of control over all processes.
The People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs was tasked with ensuring revolutionary order and state security, protecting public socialist property, registering civil status acts, including births and deaths, marriages and divorces, and overseeing border security.
Anyone targeted by the KGB's dogs was under the Chekists' watchful eye. And Stalin's awareness of the power of this body prompted the appointment of his loyal associate Heinrich Yagoda as the main Chekist. The People's Commissar became Stalin's personal weapon. Yagoda organized the Gulag, led the construction of the White Sea Canal, and was nearly as popular as Stalin. That is why he did not stay in this position. In 1936, the People's Commissar was taken by Mykola Yezhov. He will be known as the man who initiated the Great Terror. This includes over 1.5 million detainees, more than 500,000 in prisons and nearly 400,000 shot. In 1937, at the Congress of Heads, Stalin shook hands with everyone except Yagoda, who was no longer needed.
Yagoda was arrested and accused of anti-Soviet activities, essentially siding with the Trotskyist right-wing bloc. Of course, he was also accused of all mortal sins. He was forced to admit that he was allegedly preparing the murder of Kirov, that he was involved in the death of Kaibashev and other party figures. He admitted to this, but it's clear how interrogations were conducted. People could easily be forced to confess to incriminating facts against themselves.
Stalin and Yezhov in a duet issued a secret document. Order of the NKVD No. 0447. It said prisoners, activists, kuliks, and anti-Soviet party members were executed or sent to labor camps. Repressions affected detainees' families and friends. Particular attention was paid to notebooks. After the arrest, a notebook was seized, and they visited the homes of everyone listed in it. The NKVD worked smoothly and promptly. People were caught on the streets. Even NKVD officers were shot. The structure was so rigid that its leaders saw the People's Commissar role as potentially their last. Atrocities were concealed by praise in newspapers and headlines about gratitude for the NKVD's work.
They beat with anything and everything. They could beat with their hands, feet, sticks, hoses, tied their hands with barbed wire, made a swallow, sat on a chair, on a sharp edge. They forbade a person to move, sat in one position. A person had to sit like this for several hours. For every small movement, they began to beat mercilessly. There were women employees of the NKVD, who liked to rape detainees, for example, with bottles, legs of chairs, crush genitals, pull out nails, perform acts of defecation and urination on the faces of defenseless detainees who were lying on the floor and could not oppose them.
Yezhov's place was taken by Lavrentiy Beria. He ended the Great Terror and continued eliminating those disadvantageous to the regime. One of these was the oppositionist Lev Trotsky. Stalin often claimed he was a threat to the Communist International. In 1938, the NKVD sent agent Ramon Mercader to Mexico to gain Trotsky's inner circle's trust over 2 years. Ramon drove an ice axe 7 centimeters into the revolutionary's head. Trotsky died in the hospital. Meanwhile, the Second World War began. The Chekists worked on 2 fronts. The first was abroad. They coordinated partisan activities, performed counterintelligence, tracked enemy soldiers and equipment, and recruited foreign agents. And the second was inside the country. Besides guarding borders, railway lines, and frontline units directly engaged in combat, NKVD agents hunted down deserters, bandits, looters, journalists, and even innocent civilians. While some were being shot at the front line, the NKVD beat their own in the back. They acted as muscles, stabilizing the USSR.
The NKVD was entrusted with the function of shooting deserters, those who, in fact, fled, left their military units. And, of course, it was the NKVD that was involved in the scorched earth tactics that Stalin embodied.
In 1945, the Second World War ended. As cities and forces were restored in the USSR, the Kremlin erased the concept of the NKVD from documents. Beria, like his predecessors, was shot, and the new agency was named the Committee for State Security, the KGB. The new department's task was to combat nationalism, crime, engage in counterintelligence, and eliminate foreign threats to the Union. The Chekists' reach was global.
When the decision was made to create the KGB of the USSR, the KGB received very limited powers. They were engaged only in foreign intelligence, counterintelligence, and certain economic crimes, which were primarily related to foreign trade and so on. In fact, it was a certain level of real state security.
The ranks of the KGB were replenished with specially trained and loyal to the Communist Party. Their agents worked in different positions. Someone was an ordinary factory worker or a newspaper seller, and someone headed diplomatic missions abroad, controlling all processes and leaking information to the Kremlin elite. KGB officers first appeared publicly during Hungary's 1956 anti-communist revolution. The operation was called Whirlwind. The Chekists operated in the rear, locating and breaking organizers to extract information. The KGB arrested the Hungarian leadership, the Prime Minister, and the Defense Minister, leaving the country without leaders. Then they reached the Hungarian party activists, military, and students. Some were sent to Soviet prisons, and some were shot. Over 2.5 thousand protesters, with 348 civilians killed and over 19,000 injured.
When operations to suppress the uprisings in Hungary were carried out, for example, special units worked there. They worked not only to control the parts of the Soviet army that were deployed there but also to monitor the sentiments of the Hungarian communists to prevent them from succumbing to these rebellious tendencies.
And this is just an example of one sabotage operation. There are hundreds of such events in the KGB list. In 1959, agent Bohdan Stashinsky killed Ukrainian nationalist leader Stepan Bandera. In 1962, workers in Novokirksk also experienced terror. Khrushchev chose to violently quell the workers' uprising at the plant. 26 were killed, 105 were thrown into prisons, and 7 organizers were shot. KGB officers also proved themselves in Czechoslovakia, Chile, and even recruited American agent John Walker, who for 17 years leaked information about secret exercises of the US military. KGB methods are harsh and sometimes inhumane.
About 30 accused were crammed into solitary cells. They just stood there. They weren't beaten but were interrogated one by one. There was no way to sit down or lie down. And it got to the point that when, for example, one of the detainees died in this cell, he could stand among other people for 3 days.
In the 70s, KGB officers actively spread propaganda and protected communist ideology. Cultural figures, particularly with international backing, faced censorship scrutiny. They were threatened, hiding behind the inviolability of the Soviet Union. One such figure was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, author of the Gulag Archipelago. 3 volumes detail the conditions, torture and other atrocities that took place in Soviet camps. Such a book could damage the Union's reputation internationally. The KGB officers sought the cancellation of the publication by all possible means.
How did they achieve it? With manipulations, ordinary manipulations. The deputy said, "We will not recommend." He came to the head of the Writers' Union if readings were held there. And they said, "It's good work, a good piece, let's not do it." And why? Because the party body does not recommend it. And then, if for example there was a publication, after all the last argument came in, it was called censorship. It was under the full control of the State Security Committee.
Dissidents also received attention. They were closely monitored and sometimes hunted. Such people were taken wherever they were. In 1978, Bulgarian Special Services killed writer Georgi Markov in London. The death was caused by an umbrella injection laced with ricin. The KGB developed the poison and method.
In the Soviet Union, prisoners could be treated however one wished without problems. I think that in this regard, even Dr. Mengele didn't compare to the KGB specialists, who could test poisons on an unlimited number of people. And not only to poison them with gas, but to see how quickly a person, for example, dies from a certain dose of poison.
The year 1981. The USSR leadership began a large-scale operation codenamed Ryan. Concerned about a US nuclear attack, KGB and GRU agents began gathering information on America's nuclear capabilities and prospects for use against the USSR. Soviet intelligence legend Oleg Gordievsky, who later worked for British MI6, assured that a nuclear strike was not planned. Ryan then helped calm the Kremlin elite's insanity and panic.
Andropov gave the order to find the relevant plan and to track and monitor the opinion of the US leadership to see if they might carry it out in this case. We must pay tribute to the Soviet Special Services. A mole was found. He was a representative of the Czech Secret Services who, essentially, leaked information about various aspects of the US nuclear program.
The KGB recruited foreign intelligence agents alongside gathering information. This is Aldrich Ames, the former head of the CIA's counterintelligence unit. For 9 years, he leaked all his knowledge of American department activities to the USSR. He was paid up to $50,000 each time he testified against his own. This is unofficial, as Russian papers are reporting multi-million-dollar fees. The KGB worked with many agents in this way. The tactics were justified. Agents betrayed their own for high fees, and Chekists either killed or imprisoned the strangers they caught. As for Aldrich Ames himself, he ended up in the hands of the FBI and is now serving a life sentence.
In fact, he is considered to this day the most valuable agent who worked for the Soviet Union, and it is believed that he was the most expensive. For the services he provided to the Soviet Union, he received at least $1.5 to $4.5 million. He spent this money on his young wife, and this became the subject of interest of the counterintelligence agencies of the United States. And the fact that he was, of course, quite talented in terms of analytical work, but still he allegedly fell for the fact that he threw away somewhere, without burning certain fragments of his reports.
In 1991, the KGB was dissolved. The reason was the collapse of the USSR and the reformatting of the department. The plan required an independent, powerful organization operating within legal boundaries. And in 1995, the Federal Security Service, FSB, appeared. In Russia's modern history, albeit bitter, despite positioning the FSB as an independent modern security agency, it still operates as Vladimir Putin's pocket army. Following his orders, agents eliminate individuals opposed to Russian ideology, just as they did half a century ago. In 2006, in London, FSB agents eliminated former KGB officer Alexander Litvinenko. After dinner in a restaurant, he was hospitalized with poisoning. No one expected that polonium would be found in his body, affecting the nervous system and bone marrow.
Since 2000, Litvinenko has lived in the UK, cooperated with MI6, with intelligence services from other countries of the world, advising them mainly on the state of affairs in Russia. He also helped British businessmen, advising them on the specifics of doing business in Russia and connecting them with the right people.
The FSB's activities go beyond removing unprofitable people. Cybersecurity agents, together with hackers in 2016, helped the British hold a referendum on the kingdom's exit from the EU. Their targeted advertising messages have affected almost every British citizen. 150,000 accounts on Twitter alone. And more recently, Russian agents in the same Britain tried to poison the former Soviet spy Sergei Skripal. Not to mention the FSB's lawlessness in Russia, where it routinely violates human rights and eliminates journalists critical of the regime. All these cases remain unsolved. No one took them seriously. After all, the head of the FSB reports directly to Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, is himself a former KGB agent.